Hello and welcome to our last English video this week. Uh, so we kind of hinted at what we might be doing today, last lesson, at the end of last lesson, when we started talking about kennings. So what we're going to do today is we're going to try and write some examples of our own kennings. And there's an example here: poem, writing, brain, hurting, thought, provoking. These are kennings of kennings. Anyway, let's have a quick look and see what we can learn about kennings first, and then we'll have a look at what a kenning is. So, what is a kenning? And we've got one down here: a heat giver, a light maker. A kenning is a way of describing something using clues rather than just saying what it is. And this is metaphorical. It's not exactly what it is, but it gives you an idea. It's a bit of a hint, a little bit like you have to work it out yourself in order to understand what it is. It could maybe liken to more things than just what you're trying to describe, but all the kennings together link into this, or when thought about in the context of the sentence, the kenning makes sense in order to describe what you're thinking about. If we thought about one of the ones from our model text yesterday, we might think about life essence. Now, if you think about that on its own, it could be quite confusing. First off, you have to find out what life and essence mean, essence being part of us and life being what we live. But those two together, what do they mean? But then we think about it in the context of the sentence. Grendel has just had his arm ripped off and he is staggering away through the wall, losing or his life essence ebbing away drop by drop. Well, if you had your arm ripped off, what might be dropping out of the hole? Well done, blood. Yes. Life essence in this case is blood. It is the essence of what our life is. Our life is continued by the blood in our bodies. So each of these lines are two words long. Each kenning is 2 words long. Heart giver, light maker. Both of these describing the sun in this case. And this is an interesting way to think about it. Where do they come from originally? There's a slight hint here. What do you think? Yes, it comes from a Viking phrase, which means to express a thing in terms of another. What are we expressing? It's a little bit like a mini riddle used to describe something. You kind of have to work out what they might mean by what they say in relation to something else. It's an odd way of thinking, but it makes it more interesting because what it does is makes the reader have to think about what you're writing about. Or if it's in the case of a poem, which we're going to try today, they have to try and work it out like a riddle. And just by engaging that reader that little bit more, actually that can sometimes make it more interesting for the reader. So here's an example of a kenning about a cat. It's a poor licker, a day dreamer, a milk drinker, a bull chaser, a dog hater, a mouse chaser, and a stroke lover. All of these, when taken together, describe your cat. Each one on its own would also describe a cat, but you might get something else if you were thinking about some of them, like bull chaser. You could quite easily assume the bull chaser might be a dog, but when put alongside dog hater, that doesn't make any sense. So it's a little bit like a riddle you have to find out. And these can be quite fun. So let's try. Let's have a go. Let's see what we can come up with. So can you guess what these kennings might be describing? A great jumper, a water drinker, a straw eater, a strong walker, and a race winner. Have a think. What do you think? Any guesses? Did anyone guess horse? Well done if you did. Let's try another. A ball chaser, a crowd pleaser, a fast runner, a sneaky diver, a corner taker, a goal scorer, and a mate hugger. We start at the beginning, a ball chaser and a crowd pleaser. That could be lots of things. A fast runner doesn't narrow it down too much. And then we start getting a little bit more in depth into what this thing might be. A sneaky diver, a corner taker, who takes corners? A goal scorer, who scores goals? Any guesses? Yes, a football player. Next one. A word holder, a storyteller, a bestseller, a page turner, a cliffhanger, and a fantasy gateway. Have a think. Write down on a piece of paper. What do you think this one might be talking about? Well, this is an interesting one and one I like because some of these don't go together. I guess the biggest one that gives it away may be a page turner. But what it is a book. As it is a gateway to many fantasies, a way in which you can imagine lots of different places. So it's not as hard as it seems to come up with these. Some of these are much easier to come up with than you think. Now, when we're thinking about Viking kennings, they're slightly harder because you've got to remember that what went through what's in their head is slightly different to ours in the case of what they knew at the time than what we know now. So we can't necessarily write exactly like them, but we can make our own ones. And there are some tricks to doing that. First off, if we're writing a poem, a kenning poem, all of the sentences start with an a night flyer, a mouse eater, a silent sweeper. And that just helps us. It gives us an idea that it's describing something rather than just two words on their own. It'd be different if that was in a sentence. I saw the silent swooper out my window last night. You could still use it and it would still draw the reader in. And that's exactly how it's used in Beowulf. But this we're thinking about of using in poem. It's just a good way to think about it. So what else do we need to know? If you want more of a challenge, you can use alliteration. So our last one, our silent swooper, both began with S. And this just again draws the reader in that bit more. It makes it more interesting to read. It rhymes, it leads it through. So our night flyer, our mouse eater, and our silent sweeper is our owl here. But you can see that you can use these in sentences in order to make the sentence or the description of something more interesting. You could also use it to leave it slightly open to the reader. Remember, we were thinking back and we thought, thinking about those tricks we use in order to make the reader more interested in what they're reading, and we're hinting at the unknown or not giving all the details. Well, a kenning would be a really nice way of doing that. You're describing whatever it happens to be, but not giving all of the details and not being explicit in what it is. And that then in the reader's mind allows them to paint their own picture. Think of something in their own way. Think of how they might describe whatever it happens to be. Think of another trick that might help us write our own kennings. So, think about what the subject does. Let's think about a wolf, for example. So, we know a wolf comes out at night. It eats meat. It hunts its prey. It lives in the woods. It howls at the moon. But how do we turn each of these into a kenning? Well, actually, it's not as hard as you think. You have to think about what each of these means and then almost turn the phrase around, change the subject, turn it around. So comes out at night could be a night mover. Remember we talked about changing it round, we move nights to the front and then coming out, being moving at night. And that's how we get night mover. How about eats meat? Does anyone have a guess? What might it become if we change it into a kenning? Yes, a meat eater, a nice, easy one. How about hunts its prey? A prey hunter, lives in the woods, becomes woods dweller. Dweller meaning person that lives there. And a final one, howls at the moon. I hope you've all got the gist by now. The idea being a moon howler. And that would be our poem. And by the end of it, hopefully you'd have to guess what it was. So I want you to have a go. We're now experts at writing kennings. I want you to think of some kennings yourself. 4, 5, 6 kennings for a different animal. Pick a few different animals. Think about what they do, how they move, where they live, and then change whatever it happens to be into a kenning. Maybe you could phrase it like a poem and post them online. Don't give your answers to us. And we post it on Tapestry. We'll share a few and we'll see if anyone can guess what the kennings are hinting at. If you want a real challenge, what I want you to do is write a sentence. And in the sentence, I want you to use a kenning rather than saying that animal. I want you to use one of your kennings. So write a sentence about an animal, take the animal's name out and put a kenning in its place and see whether it works. See whether or not just using that kenning can get people the idea of whatever the animal it is you might be choosing. Once, when driving through Canada, I saw a moon howler standing on a rock by the road. Suddenly, you're thinking, do I have to think what a moon howler is? And you can use this in lots of different ways. Canoeing over a river, I saw a armored silver swimming through the river. I once saw a swooping flyer dive into the water. You'd have to almost work out what they are. And you give the reader that little bit more thought into what they're reading. And the more they think about what they're reading, the more involved in that piece of writing they become. Have a go. See what you can come up with. Post your work to Tapestry for me, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.